This first one was sparked by an interview I watched where it was between two tech leaders, and one's a very well-known person in the tech space. And he was talking about how there are some, so I want to be careful how I represent this. There are some people in the AI tech space who really are looking at building God with AI. And there's actually a whole term with this. It's called Robotheism, where the whole goal is it's almost this Messiah complex where it's like we're going to build the technology that saves humanity, and it's going to answer all our questions and solve all our problems. And, it's going to be this great, fantastic thing. And it's going to almost become a new deity. Now, depending on where people sit and how you land on all the definitions for some of the terminology, you may be like, we're never going to get there. And again, it's not a matter of whether we will or we won't. It's a matter of what some people might do and the effect it has. Because I think sometimes when people hear this thought, robotheism, they imagine, I don't know what, but when I hear when I dug into some of the Reddit threads or some of the articles related to this, some people kind of scoff at it because they have this imagination of like people going and worshiping a humanoid robot. And I get where that's almost comical. And I think sometimes conservatives can paint, this whole, they're reading the book of Revelation and reading into it that, these machines are going to take over and are going to worship at the altar of OpenAI. And I just don't think that stuff is helpful. But what was interesting listening to this is hearing from somebody who's on the inside. And I've actually been in conversations on some of these advisory board meetings where they won't directly say that's what they're looking to do. Honestly, most people, if you're hard pressed, if you're like, are you trying to make AI God? They'll say, no, absolutely not. But when you hear the way they talk about it and AI's potential and its capability to serve us at this ultimate level, that's exactly what they're doing. That's how they're thinking about it, whether they're thinking about it in those terms or not. And so it's interesting watching. It was interesting watching this interview. And so they got into the discussion, do you think any of that? And the person that they were interviewing definitely didn't. And I would probably I would very much share his approach to it, which is it's technology. It's an enabler. It can help us do anything, but we're not going to create anything that supersedes us because it's built on us. And if you've followed me for long, you know where my worldview is. For me, it's not possible. But it is a real thing, and it is rising, and it's not necessarily new. In doing some of my research related to this, I came across, there was a Polish church that started. It was literally called the Way of the Future Church. It started in Poland, I think, something like that. And it really was back in 2017, and it was the worship of AI. So truly almost that caricature that I described that a lot of people would go, well, then now that's just kind of like strange. But that has happened even going back to 2017. So it's weird, and it's also real, and it's very real. And I think it's bigger than just thinking about whether you're going to bow at the altar of AI or not. But it was interesting because Bill Gates even spoke into this, and I listened to the clip from him, and he even, he positioned it as a way like we're going to need new religion or philosophy to navigate what's going to come as a result of AI. And what I think was interesting is, that got positioned as, Bill Gates is saying AI is going to become a god. And I've watched enough of his stuff, and I've listened to him before. I think if he were pressed on that, I don't know that he would directly come out and say it. But what was interesting in listening to that quote, it was similar to what I said before, where I think a lot of people go, nah, that's ridiculous. But then when you listen to how they describe AI, that is how they're thinking about AI. It is going to be the thing that solves everything. And that is, to me, a concerning trend that I'm seeing. And not just, yes, obviously the extreme version of, literal traditional liturgy type stuff around AI, but even this idea that AI can save you and it will be the solution to all our problems. And that personally is something that I think is much more common And so what I think is interesting about this is people are starting to attribute that to robotheism. To me, I almost see this as, well, I suppose in some ways, if you're looking at religion as this cheap veneer or this kind of genie, you go ask for things and it gives you what you want, or it just has all the answers that you don't have the answers to, and it's smarter than you. Like, if that is what you truly think God is, a deity is, to me, that's a very cheap definition of what a deity is. And so I'm like, well, boy, if that's your definition of deity, then I guess, yeah, I can see where people would start to see AI as a god in that cheap kind of veneer sense of, yeah, I guess you ask it what you want and you get what you want, and it has a lot of knowledge and information that it can spit out at you, and it can sound really smart, and it can influence you, and it can, if you're willing, take care of things for you. I mean, I guess, but I don't know. And I think that's where a lot of times when I've got into more, and what I do agree with Bill Gates is, I do think AI, and I was actually on a podcast with an atheist where we were talking about this, because his question was, do you think with the rise of AI, things like, and he bucketed a bunch of religions together and just said, do you think AI is going to prove all these things wrong? And I was like, well, no, because ultimately all it's doing is looking at everything we've done before and then coming up with different solutions. And so my point with that is, what I think Bill Gates is getting at, that it is going to challenge us to think more about the nature of divinity, which I think is true. It's going to force us to go, well, when, even to people who would claim to be Christian or Muslim or whatever, I do think it is going to force you to go, what does that really mean to you? Because if it is nothing more than, cheap wisdom and, the ability to take care of some problems for you, I mean, then I guess, yeah, you could swap AI out for it. But if that's all religion is to you, I don't know that religion is actually adding any value. And I don't know that you've truly understood what divinity is. And I don't think you've experienced that on that level. And so I do think Bill Gates is right, that I think some of this stuff, and even on the podcast that I was on where we got into this, I did talk about the fact that, yeah, I do think there are going to be some things that AI is going to challenge in us. I think there are going to be some things that we thought we understood that we realize we didn't really understand that well. And I think that's where it's going to put us in this position of, well, so then are you going to look to AI to be your savior? Or is it just going to challenge maybe some of the things that should have been challenged in your life that you just really haven't ever had anything push you in that direction? And I think that actually can be a really healthy thing. And I think, some of that deconstruction that I think AI is going to bring is actually probably a good thing. I think there are some assumptions that people have about religion, some things that they believe, that AI is probably going to go, whoa, boy, man, we now are able to see and do things that we've never thought before. And we're going to have, but that's not new. And I think that's the part that we're on this evolutionary journey as we figure this out, because I just think back, and maybe it's because I study history a lot, but I think about like ancient civilizations and the fact that they really would have had no concept of space the way we do today. They just wouldn't have thought about it. And I think, even later times when we discovered atoms and molecules, and we discovered the complexity of things that before we didn't have the chance to do, and how for some people that made them go, oh my goodness. And I'll use an example. Let's talk creation. Okay. How was the earth created? There were some people who, as more archaeological things and all this stuff started coming out, all of a sudden they were faced with this challenge, and they went, and by the way, I'm not trying to argue one way or the other with this, but my point is, there were some people who were suddenly faced with things, and they had to go, now what do I do with this? And there are some people who just went, well, I'm just going to choose to ignore and deny that this exists so I can hold on to what's over here. And then there were other ones who went, well, if holding on to that is what religion is, then I have to abandon the religion. And the unfortunate part to me is I don't think that's what the path that you have to take. And I think that's kind of the concern I have with the rise of this whole kind of divinity complex with AI is we're starting to put our faith and our hope and our trust in something because we believe it's revealing something new to us that somehow is in conflict with what we have known for a long time. And so now we go, well, I guess that means we have to retire or sunset this because we've now somehow been enlightened by AI. I'm like, what? I think that's a false dichotomy. And I can just say, because I've shared where my worldview is, I actually think one of my best resources for how I navigate and think about the complexities and the philosophical challenges that we're dealing with AI and all of this technology stuff is the Bible. Like, I actually think there's so much wisdom to help that is timeless and transcends all of the innovations and the changes of the world. And so to me, when I think and look about this, I don't see AI all of a sudden needing to replace or sunset God. To me, it's just like, I really struggle with it. So actually, when I listen to this interview and I've talked to some people who maybe are further along the spectrum of like, yeah, AI is going to save us. I talked to somebody the other day who's like, it just in a few more years, we're not even going to have to worry about death anymore. And I'm like, you think AI is going to cure mortality? Like, in my book, there's only one cure for that, and it's not something that we built in a lab. So it's going to be interesting to see. But the challenge I would put to people, and I think this is the challenge for folks, is I would fully prepare that AI and some of the things that are going to happen, the future that's ahead of us, I think we're going through a major transformation, and it is probably going to present you with things that you are uncomfortable with or challenge, potentially things you've always held to, and all this stuff. And what I've often seen is people are very uncomfortable digging into that. And as a result, they either completely reject, true deconstructionism, where it's just like, I am abandoning everything I ever thought before, and I've now adopted this new thing, or there's complete denial. And there's this tendency to fall into these two camps instead of deconstruct it and say, what do we really know about what is timeless? And now how do we reconstruct this in a new way? And that's a large part of what I try and do with this podcast, is dig into some of these things. The one last week where I talked about conflict and AI's role in that. Well, you can jump in the camp of, oh, conflict is bad, so I'm just going to use AI to deal with it. Well, that's not good. But you can also go, AI is bad and I don't like it, and it's challenging what I thought I knew about conflict and how to think about others. And so I'm just going to avoid and hold AI at arm's length and stay over here with what I'm comfortable with. I'm like, well, that's not healthy either. I think you need to deconstruct it. And so, regardless of your religious affiliation, I think you do have to actually dig into, well, where is your hope really placed? What do you actually look to God for if you believe in God? Like, what do you, how is it a genie? Is it something you just go rub a lamp when you want something and expect it to deliver? Is it something that's, a cosmic rule book that dropped in your lap that tells you the things you can and can't do? I mean, if that's really all it is, I think you're missing out on it. But also, I think you need to actually wrestle through that challenge and go, boy, what does that mean? Because now AI is starting to disrupt some of this stuff, and I'm going to have to actually think about it. So it's going to be interesting to watch. Do I think there's going to be do I anticipate like an outbreak of churches like the Polish one, the Church of the Future, that I actually wish I had spent a little more time before recording this, actually looking into like, what is their like statement of faith? Like, what do they, I actually am really curious, like, what does that even look like? And how do you worship AI? It's very interesting to me. Do I think we're suddenly going to start seeing churches close or religious institutions close and be replaced with AI? No, despite some of the apocalyptic folks who think that that's like what I don't think we're going to see that. But I think what we are seeing more and more of is people putting their hope and their trust in AI. And that to me is concerning. And I think it's a trend that, I think it can slip into your life very easily without you realizing it because you're reacting to a caricature of what you think it is. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm curious for folks out there if you've seen other examples of this, or if you have details on some of the ones who really have gone the caricature route, but also your reactions to kind of what do you think AI is going to do to religion as it stands today. Personally, I think my personal take is if you truly have tapped into what I think religion really is intended for, AI is not going to shake anything. But that's probably a conversation, a much deeper conversation that I'm not going to have in my weekly update. So, anyway, but I thought it was really interesting hearing different perspectives. And like I said, I do think Bill Gates is correct in that it is going to challenge some of our religious and philosophical ways of thinking. And it is going to force us to have to look at things that maybe we've just taken for granted or haven't had to think about. We just prefer not to think about it.